What's up, Degenerate Nation? Welcome to the Big Bets on Campus podcast. This is the MAC College Football Betting Preview. I'm Stuckey, and joining me today are my fellow BBOC co-hosts, Mike Calabrese and the one and only Josh Nunn, a.k.a. Duck. Today, we are covering the beautiful MAC. This is my favorite preview every year. I already started writing my MAC manifesto. Got about 1,100 words on Central Michigan. 1,200 words on Toledo. So we're well on our way. Poor Pete Rudin, my editor, is going to get about 13,000 words in a couple weeks. That'll be out. But we'll have you covered from top to bottom on every team in the MAC today. And the MAC is different. It looks different, like so many other conferences. Northern Illinois is out. We talked about Northern Illinois on the Mountain West Conference Preview, which just came out. Pac-12 is also out. Sun Belt is also out. And we'll continue to roll the rest as we go forward. Appreciate everyone leaving reviews, by the way. Got a ton. We'll pick out some of the winners for hats for futures on our recap show when we recap our favorite bets. So Duck will look for some reviews, and I'll look for some as well. But a lot of good ones came in. Really do appreciate you guys because they really help this time of the year. But let's just dive right into the MAC. No sense in wasting any time. We have Northern Illinois out. Sacramento State in. Yes, Sacramento State is part of the MAC. That it just makes zero sense. But, and by the way, Sacramento State didn't even know that they were going to FBS this year, so they don't really have like a roster that's built for FBS this year. Trying to supplement some of the holes with a lot of JUCO guys late. Not sure how that's going to go. We'll get to them. But there's a lot of change in this conference, a lot of roster turnover. I mean, you just look at returning production throughout. I mean, you're going to see 130, 129th, 135th, 124th, 131st, 100th, 115th, 96th, 123rd, 87th. The exceptions to the rule. I mean, Miami of Ohio is at 84th. Western Michigan at 71st. Like, that's high for the MAC these days because, like, some of these other G6 conferences, you have someone shines, they transfer out. The cream of the crop, though, is Eastern Michigan. Top 20 returning experience, returning production and experience. So they are the outlier from a positive perspective. We'll get to EMU, have some disagreement on the Eagles, which is always good for the podcast. But there's a lot of change here. We could see, 7, 8 transfer starting quarterbacks. I think like up to 10 teams might have new quarterbacks. The only teams that I'm confident that will have the same quarterbacks are Western Michigan, Kent State, and Eastern Michigan, right?
Yep.
I think that's it. The only team that has the same head coach, quarterback, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator is Eastern Michigan. So there's a lot of change. About half the league has new offensive coordinator, half the league has new defensive coordinator. I'm sorry, I guess I should say all same quarterback, head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator is Kent State. The favorites for the conference, as of right now, depending on the book that you look at, looks like Toledo is the favorite despite widespread changes. Jason Candle is out. In comes a lot of guys from Mercer, a lot of players, a lot of coaches, including head coach Mike Jacobs. And then that's followed by Miami of Ohio, who's looking to go to their 4th straight MAC championship game at about plus 430. Western Michigan, right around the same price range, the defending champs of last year. Then you get into some longer shots, which we'll get to. But let's dive in. I guess we'll start with the favorite. Let's start with Toledo, because I am curious on, especially Duck, I'm curious to get your thoughts on this team that has a very, very heavy Mercer FCS flavor. Right? I mean, this is a team that's 130th in returning production. It's basically a brand new team. I mean, if you look at what they had last year and what they're bringing back, offensive side of the ball, they're losing their quarterback, Tucker Gleason, and the enigmatic Tucker Gleason. You never know what you were going to get from him on a week-to-week basis. Sometimes he was very good. Sometimes he was very poor. But the offense worked last year because you had a rushing attack, which they didn't have in 2024. Trey Ingham, who's now in the NFL, came in from Kentucky, previously Ohio State, gave them a boost in the rushing department. And they had a pair of receivers who did a lot of the heavy lifting in Trayvon Rudolph and the very underrated Junior Vanderos. Vanderos graduated. Rudolph is in the NFL. They do at least bring back 2 tackles who had starting experience, so that's a good place to start. And then they bring in 2 interior. So the interior offensive line is going to be rebuilt. They bring in 2 guys from Gardner-Webb, which is important because the offensive coordinator is from Gardner-Webb. So there's some at least understanding of the calls and what they're going to do from a schematic perspective. But there are certainly questions at wide receiver. You're relying on some FCS guys, right? Bond from Lindenwood, Dabbs from Mercer. Anthony Simpson's still around. He had a productive year at UMass like 3 or 4 years ago. Some forgettable Power 4 stops in between. But there's a lot of questions with John Allen Richter taking over at quarterback. He does have some experience. He's gotten to the 9 games, started 1, more of a pocket passer. But he will be taking over quarterback after serving as the backup for the last 3 years. So there's definitely some questions on this offense. And then there's even more questions on a defense that just got obliterated as far as their roster is concerned. I mean, you lost 2 corners and a safety to the NFL, a bunch of players to UConn, 3 others to Power 4, 4 others graduated. So, I mean, you're talking that 13 of the top 14 tacklers are gone. And where are they looking for production? FCS ranks. I like the Mercer linebackers, Prince and Fox, and they bring in a Penn State transfer as well with some upside. So I think they'll be okay there. And then they bring in a defensive end, Zock from Mercer, who's one of the best defensive players at the FCS level last year in the country. He's going to be a stud. Rest of the defensive line, a question. And the secondary is probably my biggest question mark on the entire team. This is a team that has had consistently one of the best secondaries in all of Group of 6 for the past, 4 or 5 years, consistently putting guys into the NFL. Lose 3 more to the NFL last year, and now they're going to need some FCS guys to hit, like a Jones from Holy Cross, who I kind of like. They do bring in 3 guys from Mercer who have familiarity with the scheme. Defensive coordinator comes in from Mercer. But I'm not sure any of them are special. So the secondary, I do have some concerns with. So, Duck, I'll start with you. This schedule is forgiving. I mean, I project them for over 8 wins. So, I lean over, but there's a lot of uncertainty here. They do avoid Miami. They get each of the bottom 3. Duck, what do you make of this Mercer-infused Toledo bunch?
I've got mixed feelings on this. On one hand, you could argue that the coaching change is actually an upgrade for Toledo. We talk about Jason Candle and all he did in the MAC. Toledo regularly had top to bottom the most talent in the MAC, and Candle did less with more than anybody in the history of this conference. Only won the 1 MAC title.
Not to interrupt you, but I compare it to if winning 1 conference championship over the past 8 years, when they clearly had the best and most talented roster every year, would be like Georgia winning 1 in 8 years. It was such a disappointment, and they consistently lost games. No one lost more games as a favorite than Candle, and they lost so many games that they should have won, not only based on the competition, but look no further than last year. That team had the best offense in the MAC. They had pros on defense, and they didn't get to the MAC title because they somehow blew that game versus Bowling Green, and they somehow blew that game versus Western Michigan. Go ahead.
I think it was 16 times as a double-digit favorite that Candle ended up losing games during his tenure. It was just so bad. And Mike Jacobs has had proven success now at Mercer. He took Division II Lenore Ryan. I think he was 32-9 there. And you're going to get such a heavy influx of influence from Mercer's team last year, which could be good and bad. There are some bright spots defensively that could shine. I think Andrew Zock is a guy who could really have an impact on the defensive line. Zach Johnson is a guy who comes over from UAB that I like. The interior is a hair undersized, and so there's a chance maybe they're not as tough against the run. Toledo's calling card for years defensively has been smothering opponents in the front 7, not allowing teams to run the football, and then just pinning the ears back and recording havoc numbers and not allowing you to throw the ball. I don't think that it looks that way necessarily. And I also 100% agree with what you said about the skill position players departing for Toledo. It was such a weapon with Trip Tranium. It was such a weapon with the two explosive receivers that they had. I think the quarterback is a downgrade. I'm not in love with John Allen Richter. And I think that when you look at some of the Toledo quarterbacks that they've had in their systems in the past, I don't think that Richter is that. I think we do see a small step back with the offensive explosivity. Maybe the offensive line is not as domineering as what they've had in the past. They've been able to line up with two tight ends and run the football, and there was just nothing that you could do about it with those prior Toledo offenses. I am concerned a little bit early this season with Toledo because I want to go back to how last year finished for Mercer. Everybody talked about Mercer being the shining defense at the FCS level, but really, it was the 2024 Mercer defense that was the exquisite elite defense. Last year's defense really took a step back. We saw that play out at the end of the season against Auburn and also in the FCS playoffs when they lost against the University of South Dakota 47-0. I think the defense could struggle early this year before they get acclimated and kind of get all their pieces together. People are talking about Toledo being able to go on the road and upset Michigan State in the opener, and I just don't think that this team will be anywhere close to that level early on. I think this team can improve. We saw that last year with Mercer. Mercer early in the season struggled against very low quality opponents. They lost against FCS Presbyterian, and then they defeated Wofford by just 1 point before starting to get on a roll in league play. But they also did benefit from playing the Citadel, Princeton, who was way down, VMI, who was terrible, Furman was way down. They played a lot of teams in the SoCon. That it was a down league last year. So I do think this could take a little bit more time than people realize for Toledo to get back to the level that they were. They're a notch below in the receiver positions. They're going to be relying heavily on FCS talent at receiver. I do think Rico Bond is explosive, and some of that transfer talent from Lindenwood carries over. CJ Miller should end up being a pretty serviceable back here. My betting deliverable for Toledo is I want to fade these guys early until we see that they get it figured out. I don't think they're going to be nearly as dominant as we've seen in the past, but it could be a team that is a play-on team. We might see the perception on Toledo swing the other way fairly quickly after a couple of poor performances. I don't know that games against Temple and San Diego State are assured wins. I do project 8.06, so I think the team will be very competitive in MAC play. I want to bet these guys later on in the season when they start to get their feet wet with the FBS.
Anything to add, Mike?
You know, it's crazy. I never thought I'd come on here and have to defend Jason Candle just a little bit. But first, Stuck, I love that you made the connection to Georgia because it does kind of have that Mark Richt feel where it's like the talent was always there. You're winning 8, 9, 10 games, but obviously your aspirations were higher. And then they bring in Kirby Smart, who was an incredible hire, but he did lose 5 games in year 1. And I do think the drop off in terms of talent, what we always knew is that Toledo was going to drop a game as a big favorite, but they were always going to have a massive talent advantage. I don't necessarily see that this year with them running away and outpacing the conference in terms of, holistic roster talent. It's also interesting just from a perspective of losing games as a favorite. Well, at some point you have to, because in his tenure, they were favored in 100 games from 2016 through the end of last year. The second closest team in the MAC, I believe, was Western at 77 games favored in that window. So, you're kind of a victim of your own roster building and success. That's as much as I'll say about Jason Candle. I'm glad that he's gone to a certain degree because he was a very frustrating coach to try to figure out, although you could just kind of spray and pray as long underdogs against him and you're probably going to hit. I do really like this coach, Mike Jacobs. I think he's got a lot of a Bob Chesney flavor to him, where it's like you continually win and build yourself up and work your way up the ladder. I think there's a lot of value in that as opposed to being a hot coordinator coming in, with limited head coaching experience. He's someone who's done it. I'm with you guys on John Allen Richter, but I think the X factor here is Kamoni Robinson. He was really good at Lenore Rhine. Obviously, it's a lower level of football, but from an X factor perspective, he has that dual threat ability. And this is one of many teams that you mentioned at the top, Stuckey, that could play musical chairs or give different people opportunities to fully win a job by the time we get to October. So I'm going to hold my powder here and wait for them to figure things out offensively. And I'm hoping it's a quarterback change because I do think it gives their overall ceiling a bump if they go with Robinson as opposed to Richter.
Yeah, I would say, look, if you like Toledo, like I mean, they might be favored in 11 games. I have them preseason favored in 10. Um, Now that could change. There's a lot of variance with this team. So, and I project them like a touch over 8 wins, win total 7.5, juice to the over. But with all the variance, and I'm just not that confident in what how all the FCS guys are going to translate. I would much rather bet them 4-1 to win the MAC. I know that it's not the best number, but if you like Toledo, 4-1 to win the MAC, much better than going over 7.5, in my opinion. Because if they get to that 8-9 win, if they're in that 8-9 win area, they should be going to the MAC championship, and everything is hitting. Well, speaking of MAC titles, the last 6 MAC champions: Ball State, Northern Illinois, Toledo, Miami of Ohio, and Western Michigan, all different teams. Do we get a 7th straight different team this year? Let's move on to Miami of Ohio, the winner 3 years ago in 2023. They've been to 3 straight MAC titles. Win total 7.5. They're about 4-1 to win the league. Chuck Martin did a tremendous job with his team last year, considering they were bottom 10 in returning production, jump up to about 84th this year. There will be a new quarterback in Gudkowski. Maybe the freshman from Kansas gets some run, but Gudkowski got some run last year. Had a disappointing finish to the year, but does at least have some experience. The offensive line, which is usually really good. By the way, they had no returning starters last year on that offensive line. Well, now they have 4. They do lose a good one in Drew Terrell to Houston, but they bring in Evan Malcor from NIU, a 3-year starter that was very good, just to plug in for where they lost Terrell. So this offensive line could be very good. I like the running backs. It's if the drop off isn't too big at quarterback, this offense should be fine. All right, they do need to replace a couple of receivers that were productive for them, but they brought in some power 4 talent. They should be able to find enough guys there. This defense is always very good. Now, they did lose about 5 multi-year starters. Their nickelback Walters is an NFL free agent. Their defensive tackle Washington. Their linebacker Hondrew. The biggest loss is their defensive end Adam Trick, who went to Texas Tech. Just a pressure monster. They'll need to find some pressure to replace that massive void. And then Eli Blakey is a 4-year starter at safety for them. So there is some losses on defense, but this team should still be very good. They do avoid Toledo, which maybe is good or bad. We don't know. We just talked about the variance in Toledo. They do go to Western Michigan in the finale. And I do think the schedule sets up fairly nicely in the fact that from all right, you have some new pieces on defense. You have new quarterback, breaking in new receivers. Well, their first 4 conference games are Bowling Green at UMass, Akron at Central Michigan before a bye. And then you get Buffalo at home, and then you finish Ohio at Kent at Western Michigan. You know, that Western Michigan game, that could end up determining where this season goes. And you get them at the end of the year, which I think is a good thing. We've seen Chuck Martin's teams start slow sometimes and really turn it on at the end of the year. And you get some of those big swing games at the end of the year. And by the way, new offensive coordinator, Gus Rangland, the Gus Bus, my guy, who I love. But this team should be very good in the mix once again. Mike, I'll throw it to you. Anything on Miami of Ohio?
Well, I just said it, in terms of quarterback play, Thomas Gudkowski, how did he leave us from the bowl game? 6 for 22, 72 yards, a pick, just a disaster. Do they go to McComb or even Caleb Heavner, the D2 transfer? I don't know, but I respect this head coach Timor and their defensive coordinator. Bill Breakin has just been a monster defensively. He's had a top 3 finish in the MAC in all 4 seasons, created 83 turnovers, 133 sacks since the beginning of 2022. So many all-MAC performers in Oxford. Established pieces coming back on that side of the ball. So they're going to play the exact way that Chuck Martin wants to play. The schedule works for me. I don't see, Cincy being unwinnable. I'm really down on the Bearcats this year. Holy Cross, UConn, Akron, Ohio, all at home, at UMass, at Kent. This is still a very strong defense with winners. They'll figure something out at quarterback. I can't necessarily put a play on it just because it's difficult to envision what it's going to look like if I have no idea, because sometimes it's not even just who they plug in there. It's do you lose the locker room and the continuity a little bit by playing musical chairs and flipping around? I don't know. I want to see how it looks in September 1st. But there's no way that you can fade this team just based on the quarterback play. So that's why I'm keeping my money on the sideline with this one. Caleb Heavner, I think maybe is the most interesting element. But at this time of year, you can take any pull quote that you want from a beat reporter. Like, they're going to say it's an open competition. You don't know if that's true at all. We have to see what he does. And Chuck Martin can be very cagey on stuff like this. So it's going to be a fact-finding mission for me in September to see if this offense can get to C+ levels, because if they can, Breakin is the defensive coordinator that I want to hang my hat on in this conference.
Duck, what do you got on Miami of Ohio?
I actually like the Redhawks this year to overperform against expectations. Chuck Martin has done just such an excellent job during his tenure with Miami. We've regularly seen them junk the non-conference to prepare for MAC play, and so he doesn't care what the performance looks like in the Power 4 road games. This year, I think they get a little bit of a break with the non-conference schedule. They've got 3 games that are winnable. They're probably not going to beat Pitt, but you get the rivalry game against Cincinnati in a neutral stadium in the NFL venue. Holy Cross is down. They'll beat them. UConn comes in, and maybe you get a little bit of a chance to stick it to the former coaching rival and Jason Candle. So I actually think this year, above really any other in the last 5 or 8 seasons, Miami of Ohio can start this season strong. I like what they bring back defensively. I think the defense is going to be one that continues to morph into a stout MAC defense that's built for the cold weather play that we see over the last 4 weeks of the season. I think when you talk about a havoc guy like Roosevelt Andrews, he's a guy who could be that havoc guy. I really like the linebackers. Malcolm McLean and Blaine Merrick are really solid MAC linebackers. Cy Young at the nickel position is going to be a versatile player that they can use in various different ways. The corners are still strong despite the safety losses. And, I'm willing to give Gotkowski a free pass a little bit. If you remember back to last year, Miami was right in the thick of the MAC race, and Daquan Finn quits stunningly. They go to the backup quarterback Hessen, who was just not ready to go, and then Gotkowski gets thrown in there in the flames. You don't know how many reps he took or how mentally prepared he was, and that's why it looked quite poor. But I think if they can get some clear direction on what they want to do with the quarterback position and use the non-conference to get them ready, I actually don't think the schedule lines up too badly. I think they play Western Michigan at a great time. Despite it being on the road, there could be some weather elements. We'll talk about Western Michigan later, but I think Miami will be able to run the football on those guys. I think it'll be a low-scoring, hard-fought game. I think Miami has a schedule that's conducive to racking up the wins, and I would only look to the over here.
Speaking of Western Michigan, let's get to the defending champs. Win total over 7.5 juice to the under. They're also sitting at around 4-1 to win the league. They're one of the 3 favorites along with Toledo and Miami of Ohio. The good news in the offseason for the team that won a conference championship is, your quarterback is back. Your star running back, who went off late in the year a couple of times, and Buckley is back. And they only lost 1 starter to the portal, which is pretty surprising. And it was a long snapper to, I think, Oregon, for a team that won its conference championship. And then they brought in 10 others from Power 4 ranks. That's the good news. The rest, I don't know. They're just screaming sell. They're screaming sell signals on Western Michigan to me. I'll mention a couple because I know you guys are bearish as well. Lose your defensive coordinator to the NFL, who did a tremendous job last year. Now you have, the linebacker coach has taken over. He's the youngest coordinator in FBS now. I think you might see a schematic drop. Additionally, the defensive line was the engine, and the linebacker room is the engine of that defense. And you lost your 2 defensive ends to the NFL. And I think there's going to be a drop off there. Yes, there's talent in the secondary, but if you're not getting the same pass rush, you're probably going to see a drop-off in production despite the experience. They also finished top 30 in special teams last year. Western Michigan's had some rough years. I doubt that happens again. They finished 3-1 in 1 possession games. They were +9 in turnover margin. And when you look at what this team did last year, I mean, their wins, they basically won all 3 coin flips, and then 4 wins over the bottom 4 teams who went 11-37 combined. So this team easily could have won like 2 or 3 fewer games. You're selling, Duck. Anything to add here?
Yeah, I think we've got a couple things working against Western Michigan. First of all, the MAC has been a proven conference where it's very difficult to repeat as champion. And I do believe Western Michigan was a team that still snuck up on some of the teams last year. The regular season win total was only 4.5. They weren't projected to be a conference contender. And they started the season 4-4 before getting hot and kind of riding that momentum wave down the stretch. But I mean, you look at some of the games that they were playing. It was 7-3 into the third quarter with UMass. They didn't put away Eastern Michigan until the fourth quarter. Uh, there was some turnover variance that they were benefit of, but you look at the havoc that was created by Western Michigan last year. They had more havoc last year than in the previous 2 seasons combined, and teams just absolutely could not run the football against Western Michigan. They could hardly drop back to pass without facing immediate pressure, and they really leaned in on that with their defensive scheme. And I just don't know that that's going to be something that we replicate this year with Western Michigan. And I think it could cost them a game in the non-conference that you normally wouldn't think. And this year, I think when they go to Rice before they play Boise State, I think it's going to be tough for them to stop the run. I think that they're going to really struggle to get off the field in that game. I don't think they'll beat Michigan. I don't think they'll beat Boise State. So I think it'll be a slower start. This team still could rebound and factor into the MAC, but you talk about sky high expectations from a team that really overperformed last year, and then now you're seeing this team lose some significant key contributors. The other thing too, offensively, that I worry about schematically, Brock Lowry had 203 rushing attempts last year, and now the backup quarterback safety valve is gone. I just wonder if maybe they try to run him less. Maybe that puts a little more pressure on Jalen Buckley to do the work, and maybe the rushing offense takes a little bit of a step back. They also did lose some pieces. A tight end that they lost was really a reliable player for them. I know they've got some returning talent at the receiver position that they can rely on, but I don't think this offense is necessarily one that's going to be equipped to drop back and throw the football consistently, particularly when we get into those cold weather situations. The offensive line loses some talent. I just think they're a notch below on the offensive side. I don't think we'll see them run Lowry as much. Defensively, they're not going to create as much havoc. And you know what? It was a team that got hot down the stretch last year. I don't know that they sustained that throughout the entirety of this season. So still a strong team. I thought 7.5 was too high, so I did play under the win total. But I do have another betting deliverable. You do want to bet on Western Michigan when they host Monmouth, who's way, way down in the FCS from what they were last season. And Western Michigan does take these FCS games very seriously. 12-4 over their last 16 against FCS. They prepare seriously. They really go into it with a full go. You do want to back Western Michigan against the number when they're laying it against Monmouth in week 2.
You have to go under here with Western Michigan, if anything. Calabrese, you agree?
Yeah, I agree. I'll just add on to the Brock Lowry piece of it. You know, he just was not thrown into many known passing situations throughout the season. He only threw the ball 47 times when trailing last year, which is a crazy statistic for a guy who is their full-time starter. And I do think that if he is forced to do that, he just doesn't have the kind of accuracy. And also his sack numbers spiked in those situations when people did not have to account for Buckley and they could just pin their ears back. They got to him. So it was a combination of the line, also how he processes and holding the ball too long, waiting for people to get open. So I think that's an issue. I agree with the scheduling notes that you guys got into. A 1-3 start with Michigan and Rice Roadies and Boise on the menu is absolutely there. And then they're at Toledo and that Miami game. If you wanted to play Miami of Ohio this upcoming year, we just talked about the quarterback room and what they're trying to do on offense. You want to catch them earlier in the MAC schedule, not in the season finale. So I think everything, not just the teams, but also the timing is working against them. And yeah, they were hot as a pistol. They went 10-1 down the stretch. But I still go back to that Toledo game. That was a Tucker Gleason special where they just gift wrapped a game and left the door open. This is not the team for the Myrtle Beach Bowl that absolutely beat down, their opponent and looked like gods doing it. And I'm hoping that kind of lingers and stays in the market so everyone can get the best of this number. But yeah, under 7.5 is my play as well.
Let's move on to Ohio. Ohio is listed over win total 6.5. They're about 7 plus 730 to win the league. They go from 54th to 129th in returning production. they basically lose their entire offense. There's a quarterback battle here. Maybe it's Nick Polis, who's awful, or maybe it's a transfer from New Hampshire. Maybe it's a freshman in Davis, but they lose almost everything. Major questions at wide receiver. Their offensive line last year, they had all 5 guys start all 13 games. Well, they now have 0 FBS starts on the offensive line, and the depth is bad. I don't even know. Like, is their center the guy from EIU? He didn't even play. This offensive line could take a big step back. There's quarterback questions. They lose their stud running back. They lose 7 multi-year starters on offense, including Hendricks, who was their stud receiver who went to Cal. The other receiver went to Oklahoma State. Parker Navarro, who pulled off some many magic tricks, is gone at quarterback. I don't know. I think that I will say, they have been dominant at home the past 2 years. They do avoid Western Michigan. I've bet the under they've had 40 wins their last 4 years. But this is I should mention they have a new head coach because their head coach was caught drinking on the job, among other things. The schedule on paper is pretty easy, but I think this team takes a step back. But I've lost on their under the last 2 years, so who am I to say? Let's go to you guys. All right, Duck, you like the under here. Maybe you can convince me to throw my money at Ohio. I have to hit this under eventually.
Yeah, and we've been burned a little bit over the years with Ohio unders and pulling the rabbit out of the hat numerous times. Another coaching change, so now you're on the 3rd regime in 3 years. I know they've kept it in-house, so there's not as much change and dichotomy with the staff, but I will tell you, you just tinker with the staff. You have to replace a position coach. Somebody wants to put their fingerprint on the defense and somebody else doesn't get to, and there are just a few things there that are going to be potentially problematic. You are not going to have quarterback play anywhere close to what's come down the pipeline. I mean, you talk about the Rorick brothers and Tettleton and Parker Navarro, and they don't have a player that's anywhere close to that level.
4 straight years with a first or second team All-MAC quarterback.
And it's just not going to be anything close to what Parker Navarro is able to bring to the position. Say Bangura was such a bruising running back, and he departs. The receiver weapons that used to play in Athens are so depleted now that they're going to rely on guys like Dom Dorwart and Max Rotarde, Ian Pugh. These are guys that are just not playmaking receivers. I have significant questions on the offensive line. I think we saw, even with some of the great players that Ohio had last year, that the offense was just down a notch from what it used to be when it was high flying and scoring a ton of points in the MAC, and it's not anywhere close to that. I just think there are situations where this team is going to get off to a poor start. I think we've seen some of these other teams as well at the top of the MAC, the usual suspects, kind of come down to the pack. And this is a schedule where you're playing some of these teams that are considered in the middle of the MAC that are trying to break through. In Central Michigan, EMU, Akron was better last year. These are teams that are going to be much more competitive games than the regular blowouts that Ohio is used to seeing on their schedule. And I just don't think they have the personnel. I don't think they have the offensive personnel to outscore teams like they have in the past. And I think defensively, they take a decent step back. There's just such little talent returning defensively. I don't like it this year. I did play under the win total.
Mike, anything to add quickly?
I like Maddox, their defensive coordinator. They get him, a couple years off of his work at San Diego State. But I agree with all of the personnel issues with this team. Scott is Fording as their OC. If this line doesn't hold up, it doesn't matter that they have a good 1-2 punch in Brune and Victor Rosa. So I'm really just holding out for Matt Vezza somehow to win this job, because when you look at what he did at New Hampshire, I think he's a much better fit. Poulos, I think, is somebody who already kind of has an established ceiling because he's just not mobile enough for this offense to be able to work. But if it is Vezza, I'm going to make, kind of an update to my power rankings in real time throughout the season. And maybe he gives them a little something because he does have some wiggle. I think he's a little bit closer to some of the quarterbacks that we've got comfortable with watching from Ohio in the past few years. But at this point, I'm in a holding pattern because this offense has a lot of new pieces, and the line, if it doesn't come together, it really doesn't matter who's playing quarterback.
All right, Doc, you convinced me. We're back. Under Ohio once again. I'm a masochist. All right, let's move on to Central Michigan. We have Drinkle in year 2. They went 7-3 6-5 in the regular season last year, then lost the bowl game. Although I will say their wins were a joke. They beat San Jose State. They were lucky to do that. Wagner, EMU, BG, UMass, Buffalo, and Kent. They didn't beat a single team with a winning record. Those teams combined to go 26-58. So they did. One of the reasons I had a future on Central Michigan was because of the schedule. So this year, win total sitting at 6.5, juice slightly to the under, 8-1 to win the MAC. Look, there's Drinkles. They're going to go to the offense that they wanted to run last year. They want to run more of a power spread option based offense, and they really couldn't do it due to injuries. I mean, they had offensive line guys injuries. They just didn't have guys that fit the scheme. You know, you had a lot of holdovers. So he's building this roster to be able to do what he wants to do. One example of this, which is a pretty funny story, one of their assistants left to go to Georgetown in March to be the offensive coordinator. And he was at Central Michigan last year. He was at Georgetown the previous 3 years. And then they brought in a couple offensive linemen from Georgetown in December that were starters for Georgetown. He probably helped them identify these offensive linemen that were like, look, these guys have started for a while, bring them in. So they bring in a couple seniors from Georgetown. And then a couple months later, he gets the offensive coordinator job at Georgetown. He's probably like, shit, I wish I had those offensive linemen still. But this is an interesting team in kind of that mid-tier with Ohio. Mike, you like them. You're taking a flyer on the chips.
I am taking a flyer. I think 8-1 is enough. When you look at it, this offensive line has a chance to be really, really good in this league. 4 starters back and another senior. The 2 deep is in great shape, and that's where Drinkle's teams are going to sink or swim. Angel Flores can run. I would argue he has like an 800-yard, 10-touchdown ceiling if he stays healthy the whole time. I like the depth at running back. Jaden Clervaux popped at Holy Cross. Vaughn Blue was never light on talent. He just didn't, wasn't able to stay healthy and get the opportunities, at his previous stops. But behind a really good line, I think this 1-2 punch at running back could work. The receiving core has experience with Lewis and McIntosh. I think this team that finished 120th in SP plus offense because of the injury issues, because of the transition year, a year 0, I think they can go for 120th to maybe knocking on the door for about 90th. And if they can control games, I don't care as much about the points and the yardage, but protect this defense as it gets its sea legs. Because when this defense was good last year, when they held opponents below 20 points, they went 7-0. And the front still has some good size. Quavion Bird, I think, could be all MAC at defensive tackle. Denma needs to be their, tackle for loss machine. He's a thumper at 245 pounds at linebacker. Sean Cronin, their DC, is back, and I think he's always been an exceptional defensive line coach when you look at his track record and his history of coaching up the position. So I have a little bit of faith that he can elevate that and do more with less. What I like here too is that I think they'll lose in New Mexico. They're going to get bombed by the Hurricanes. Miami coming to town, or they go to Miami's house, I should say. I think that's going to help them fly under the radar. We just saw this with Western. Start last season 0-3. That near upset of North Texas. But because of that allowed teams to kind of take their foot off the gas a little bit when they played Western Michigan. I think we're going to see that with Central here. And given that, when they get into their MAC slate, whether it's venue or it's rest opportunities, it's a pretty good situation for them. Western Michigan and Miami, Ohio come to them, and both sides, are going to be, I believe at this point, playing 7 or 8 straight games. So who's going to be more worn down? I kind of like the more physical team. And as I mentioned, the depth on the chips 2 deep for the offensive line. I like an opportunity to play teams before they get that bye week. 2 late roadies would be bad news if it weren't Buffalo and Ball State. No Toledo. I think they get to Detroit. And at 8-1 in a league where nobody repeats, it's been since 2012, since we've had back-to-back champs. You're going to have some teams come off the radar and find their way to the MAC championship game this year. I think it's going to be Central. They just need to stay healthy at quarterback, but I like that they have an established identity. And in terms of overall consistency, a lot of these teams were begging for, can this quarterback pop? Can this guy win the job? Can the passing game find new weapons? Like Central, I think there's just lower variance when you're a run kind of team. And in this case, I think they're going to be able to win some rock fight games. And that's been the recipe really for so many of the MAC champs in the last 5 years. So I'll go with the chips here.
I respect it, but I can't get there I think they're still 1 year away. And And one of the main reasons, like I really do like the offensive line, and they can even afford injuries there, and not a lot of teams can say that. But I think this defense takes too big of a step back. I respect the play. I'm not quite there. I think they're a year away. Duck, what do you think?
This is akin to what Matt Entz was trying to do at Fresno State, where he really only got a partial install in on the system, and you're trying to instill this culture of physicality, mental toughness on the offensive line, tight end game. You could see that they tried to do a little bit of that, and they had some weapons last year at Central Michigan, Trey Cornist and DeCorian Temple, and they really weren't used appropriately. Now I think you get the full install of the system. You're going to have some tight ends in there. They're going to use a fullback. We're going to see a ton of 22 personnel. And I think that's great for the game of football because it's really one of the only teams left that does this. But I think Von Blue is a guy who can shine in the system. I think when you now identify what you want at the quarterback position with Flores running the run-heavy system, I do think the offense will be more potent. We saw it at times in game situations last year where this team just got so dejected when they could not move the line of scrimmage on offense, and it snowballed against the Power 4 opponents, including the bowl game. I think they'll do better at that. I think they'll do better at establishing the line of scrimmage and getting the ball to their ball carriers, advancing the point of attack, and that'll be really huge for this offense to be able to sustain possession of the ball and maintain drives and accumulate scoring opportunities more frequently. I have every game in MAC play for Central Michigan priced at single-digit spreads. They're favored in about half of them, but there's really nobody on this schedule that CMU is going to be considered, oh, this is an unwinnable game in MAC play. And I do think if there's just a couple of things that go right offensively, you can get that belief in the locker room. You can get the belief that this system can work. I don't hate the look with Central Michigan. Are they probably really a year away from really defining that and really putting themselves as a potential MAC power? Probably so, but you've got to anticipate some of this stuff. You have to anticipate when a team is going to.
Yeah, the price probably won't be as good next year. And if they're a year ahead, this play will work out.
I don't hate the look. I think Central Michigan can be feisty. I think they can score more points than last year. Defense does take a step back, and that's a bit concerning, but you're getting, if this gets to 14 going to New Mexico, I mean, we saw what they did last year going to the West Coast and truncating that game down against San Jose State. They missed a few opportunities. So did the Spartans, but I'm not laying 14.5 with New Mexico. I'm telling you right now.
Yeah, I mean, they're like a service academy. They're going to be good as a big dog.
Just one final note. I think I did misspeak on McIntosh. He did tear his ACL, so he's going to be out as their wide receiver too. It would have been nice, to be able to have him back. Nasir Williams, Justin Ruffin. Once again, it's not their identity, but at least in terms of some known pieces, I still think the element of them getting to a bowl game last year and getting those extra practices and reps, they're going to need those guys on the two deep who were. I mean, it was a big bonus, at least for just some opportunities for the coaching staff to have their hands on them and kind of work some things in, because they're going to need some guys to really arrive this year and play some significant snaps. So just those are kind of the little things that can help a team jump from lower middle class to all of a sudden competing for a conference championship.
All right, let's move on to another team, the other team in the mid-tier from a futures perspective, EMU. Eastern Michigan win total sitting at 6.5, juice to the under. They're around 10-1 to win the league. This is my sleeper, my futures bet. I played some 14-1. It's come down a bit. Like anything above 10-1, shop around. As always, these G6 futures can vary widely from book to book. You don't want to miss out on, a 13-1. You don't want to take a 10-1 if there's a 13-1 available. That stuff matters. But what's the case for Eastern Michigan? Part of it is, look, we just covered the top of the conference. Like Toledo is Mercer. Miami of Ohio has question marks. Western Michigan, we think, takes a step back. Ohio, we think, takes a step back. You're making a case for Central Michigan, who's, running out a triple op. They're going to be in they could lose they also could lose many games, that they're going to be in close games a lot, and their defense has questions. And this is the one team in the league that is that ranks in the top 80 in returning production, and they're in the top 20. They bring their quarterback back. They probably have one of the best quarterback situations in the entire conference. They have one of the best head coaches. They always play close games. I mean, 80 of their past 110 games have been decided by one possession. And you have an experienced team now with a good quarterback situation. I like their receivers. I like their coach. Their special teams are always going to be good. There's going to be a lot of close games in the MAC. If they can get a couple of those to break their way, they can get to Detroit. Now, they avoid Miami of Ohio, who's like one of the teams that I'm like most confident will be in the mix. And this is the first time, by the way, that Creighton since 2017 has a starting quarterback back. They usually are just trying to find a new quarterback every single year. Their defense was bad last year, but did improve down the stretch. And they also had a ton of injuries last year. They'll basically get 3 starters back. A couple of them missed the entire year who were going to start for them in the secondary. But they'll get 3 starters back from injury on defense, which is basically like adding 3 from the portal. The offensive line is still a question. I mean, if you look at their depth chart, there's 4 oars, right? They bring in some power forward transfers who don't have much experience, some lower level transfers. And then the defensive line feels like it's always a question at Eastern Michigan, will be once again this year. So like the trenches are what worries me, but with all the questions with the rest of the league, give me Creighton, give me Kim back. And if Kim gets hurt, who's coming in? Stuckey.
Scout Team Player of the Year at EMU last year, backup quarterback Jay Stuckey.
Stuckey is coming in to save the day. EMU is my flyer. Duck, you're on board.
Yeah, I mean, EMU, Chris Creighton, 13th year already here, and has done an exquisite job of just bringing this team up from a regular doormat that was never winning and really elevated the floor of the program and made them consistently formidable in MAC play. They do have the second easiest schedule in the MAC this year per my ratings. Is Noah Kim possibly the best quarterback in this league? There's a real chance that he is that, and throws a great ball, can make some real high-level throws. We've seen the MAC with their talent level over the last several years depleted. And when you have an experienced quarterback and you have a guy who's comfortable in the system, I think it really does give EMU a fighting chance. They've got 5 receivers that return, that have experience with what they want to do. Devereaux, Benson Prosper, Harold Mack, Joshua Long was a second-team All-MAC tight end. I think the question for Eastern Michigan is the development of the offensive line. They do bring in some nice pieces with Dellinger coming in from Michigan State. Tyler Brumfield comes in from Oklahoma State. He was a former JUCO All-American. So there are some pieces here where this offensive line could end up being quite formidable, and they've got 2 weeks to really figure it out before they take their lumps at the P4 road games. Defense, I think, has some nice pieces back. Carter Evans is back. Peyton Christian comes over from Lamar. He was a second-team All-Southland player.
He's actually got some size, too, which EMU could always use. He's like 3'10".
They really needed that because they couldn't stop the run last year. 232 is what they gave up per game on the ground. Quincy Baez is a guy off the edge that they really like. I think the linebacker group is vastly underrated. Barry Manning, Zach Mauchan was a complete dude. Bryce Llewellyn's a good player. But, one thing that we kind of briefly touched on was special teams. Grant Kersner was their special teams coach and left and has now come back. And he made their special teams elite nationally, like top 20 rankings nationally. And so I think special teams is an area where Eastern Michigan will improve. In a closely contested conference like the MAC, special teams can take you from 5-7 to 7-5 very quickly. And you talked about the schedule, Stuck. Look at the first 5 MAC games: Sac State, UMass, Akron, hosting Toledo, and at Ohio. Could be 5-0 before they hit the home stretch. They get Central Michigan coming in off the bye, and they play that one in a neutral environment where there's going to be no weather, so throwing the ball around the yard won't be an issue. I really do think this is not just group agreement think. I think Eastern Michigan has a chance to make some noise. They have the schedule to do so. They have key returning pieces. I actually think the defense could take a step forward this year with some of the guys they bring back in. So, yeah, I like the look with EMU.
Mike, well, maybe this comes down to the EMU-CMU matchup, both teams off of a bye late in the year.
At Ford Field.
Yeah. Do you want to?
Eastern gave up one of their home games to play at Ford Field.
Yeah, but I think that could favor EMU. It's not like they have a great home field advantage because they want to throw it. CMU wants to run it. CMU, I think, would rather play outdoors in like snow and wind than at Ford Field. Would you agree with that, Doc? So there's a. It's not like EMU has this like rocket
it's the factory,
crowd.
baby. Come on, don't disrespect
the ugliest viewing experience.
And the factory.
Do you want to pour some cold water on us?
I sure do. Like, let me just step in here for a second. Last 7 years, 5 losing seasons for Chris Creighton in terms of the win-loss record. Do I think he exceeds expectations? Absolutely. He is always handcuffed by some of the most limited resources in the sport. I think that the guy deserves his flowers. There's a difference between going over 5.5 and getting to bowl eligibility and winning this league, and it's defense. Because, I mean, cue up the Nick Saban quote about goose shit running through a tin horn and all that stuff. They gave up almost, 2,800 rushing yards last year? This league is hurting for quarterbacks. People want to just run the ball if they can run the ball. And that's all you needed to do against this team last year. They're 114th in S&P plus defense. They only forced 9 turnovers. And then they go ahead and they elevate Casey Teagarden and Tate O'Meal to co-DC, which was an interesting move because I think they need a new vision or they needed better players. And their front 7 still has a lot to prove, in my opinion. 132nd ranked transfer class, only 2 3-stars joined this defense. That being said, the win total, I'm there because you got Sac State, San Jose State, Lindenwood, UMass, all in the first 6 weeks. They could certainly build momentum, but then I think they're just going to run into teams that are able to run the football. Toledo, Western, Central, who I mentioned at Ford Field. I'll go halfway there with you guys. I'll be there, leaning towards the over. But this defense has to show me that they can get off the field and stop anybody from just running power and dives and into the A gap. And until they do that, how can you have any confidence that they're going to really be able to bow their neck when it matters most? I would feel totally differently if Chris Creighton, who is very well respected, as I've said multiple times in the coaching community, I feel like he should have been able to go out and get a rising star defensive coordinator. And he showed kind of loyalty to his guys, and he's promoting, and I don't see it. I think offensively, the quarterback play is going to be there. There's going to be some, it's like the MAC middle class and upper middle class. There's going to be a lot of tight games, sure, but you're asking me to back a defense I have zero faith in. So I'm out on Eastern Michigan to make it to Detroit. And hey, listen, I've been proven wrong plenty of times in the MAC. I know I'm going up against 2 MAC diehards with incredible track records, but I think it's just a bridge too far if they're giving up 200 plus yards on the ground.
Well, I find it rich that you are against you're against Eastern Michigan because of questions on their defense right after you touted Central Michigan at a
last year. I get that there's all new guys. Last year they actually did it, and they have the same defensive coordinator. And you'll have to forgive me. Central Michigan, yes, they had a lot of experience. So they have studs. They have 4 and 5 stars that walked out there. No, so you have to make do with what you can make do with. That's a defensive coordinator I believe in. These guys, we'll see. Hey, listen, I think it'll be a fun rivalry, and it will come down to that game at Ford Field, not for the MAC championship game, but for that regular season game that Eastern gave away.
All right, moving on. We have 7 of the what I would consider bottom tiered teams in the MAC. Some of them could jump up, certainly, but let's have a little fun here. Can you guys, how we'll go through these games? You guys don't even know I'm about to do this, but Ball State spinning. Ball State win total 3.5. Pretty much around even money. 35-1 to win the league. This team went 4-8 last year, 3-1 in one possession games. Yurimovich's second year. This is another rebuild. 126 last year in returning production, 123rd this year. I mean, there's not much to like here. The defense loses its top 7 tacklers. 6 seniors graduated, lost 1 to the NFL, 1 to Liberty, 1 to Washington, a corner to Kansas, a defensive end to Western Michigan. I just don't know what the bull case is for this team. I project 3.3. So would actually slightly lean under. By the way, you can find like 125 to 1, I think, on them if you shop around. There's no experience on the defensive line, linebacker. The D lost basically everything. The offense still should be messy. I mean, maybe the quarterback situation, they have a better fit at quarterback. I don't know where they're going with this. Calabrese, do you have any quick thoughts on Ball State?
So if it's Keldrick Luster, who comes in from Texas State, he's basically a bowling ball with arms. He's 5'10", 248 pounds as a quarterback. Yet he had really nice shiftiness. You saw it at SMU, at least, in terms of his tape. He received scholarship offers from Air Force and Navy out of high school. So a high-character guy who's very athletic, who can take hits. If he gets the nod, I like their offense a lot more, which isn't saying a ton, but I'm not going over on this. The roster is not there. I just think they could be a little bit more entertaining, maybe playing some higher scoring shootouts than the rest of this league, but I think people are going to run through them. And yeah, if it's not Luster, by the way, and if they go with Mizell, who played at D2 Concord, he only completed 57% of his passes. That is not the solution for an offense that needs a real playmaker quarterback.
Yeah, you mentioned getting run through. Like, you don't want your weakness in the MAC to not being able to stop the run. And their defensive line lost everyone, including Voorhees, who was a stud. He's now in the NFL. They have one returning FBS start. They lose their top 6 linebackers, 0 FBS starts at linebacker. They might start 2 redshirt freshmen at linebacker. This defense is going to be bad. What I can say is they avoid Miami and Western Michigan. The offensive line is a little bit more experienced, year 2 of the system. Kelly was responsible for a lot of the sacks, but they did give up close to, 50 sacks last year? Duck, you got anything to add on Ball State?
Yeah, way too many sacks, and they didn't throw the ball very frequently. They gave up
threw the
49
ball
sacks.
33% of the time.
Well, yeah, and they were sacked on 18% of dropbacks. They're going to need to cut that in half to even think about being remotely competitive in the MAC this year, and they're not even going to throw the ball very much. They're going to run the ball 65% of the time.
All right, next spin. Buffalo and Breeze by an inch over Duck. Breeze, any thoughts on Buffalo? Win total is 5.5 juiced to the over. You can also find some 6.5 heavily juiced to the under. They are 13 shop around, but 13 to 1 to the book I'm looking at now to win the league. Thoughts on Buffalo?
Yeah, you know that scene in The Departed where Alec Baldwin talks to the guy who screwed up the surveillance and he punches him in the face and he's like, "You effed this all up." That's you, Pete Lembo, last year. You effed it all up. You went 1-5 against the spread as a favorite. You barely beat Kent State. You lost to Akron by 8. Oh, man. I'm too emotional.
They should have lost to UMass.
Should have lost so many games. That team was...
And UMass was celebrating on the field, and then they ended up losing the game.
Listen, they're replacing 17 full-time starters. They're walking in with an unknown first-time play caller at OC in Tony Torkars. We don't have clarity on the quarterback. You know, Elijah Holmes, redshirt freshman Jason Wright. They both have wheels that Lembo generally likes, but if his track record for identifying quarterbacks is what he put on the field last year, no thanks. Wide receiver room gutted. No Aljae Henderson. What I learned from Ohio last year is that a brand new team in the league in terms of either coaching or talents, like, it's not assuredly bad. That's why I don't have a play on them. So I'm going to wait to see how they look early against Albany and at FIU before really passing any judgment. But they are in podcast prison for me until further notice. After last season, I got burned so many times, so many DMs that I received, deservedly so, carrying Pete Lembo's water. Absolutely not. I'm not doing it again. This guy has multiple mea culpas headed in my direction before I even nodded him passing him on the street.
I'm going under on Buffalo. Under 5.5 at plus money's fine. If you want to pay for under 6.5, I know the schedule's easy. I mean, they get two FCS teams at home in Albany and Robert Morris, which is comical. But this team gutted. Last year they were like top 65, which is good for a MAC team in returning production. They're bottom 5 this year. Wide receivers are horrendous. Offensive line only has 10 FBS starts. I mean, the offense, they lost 5 multi-year starters. The defense, brand new quarterback. It's probably who's it going to be? A freshman or the Wingate transfer?
Yeah, I think that they're probably going to go with the freshman for the legs, but yeah, it's not good.
And then you look at the defense. The defense loses 9 of their top 11 tacklers, including 7 multi-year starters. A lot of experience gone. Their special teams last year were actually good. I had them in the top 25, and they lose their kicker, their punter, Snow, their punt returner. Like, I know Lembo's, that's his specialty, but the special teams could also fall off a cliff. This is an under for me. I mean, if you take away Gathings, who has 30 career starts, their wide receiver, their entire offense has 15 career FBS starts, and their defense was, they just have, and they have no money. They're $0. So they just, like, look who they brought in. It's D2. There's D3 guys they're bringing in. Like one of the guys they're excited about is this linebacker from Virginia. He's like a special team. He's like a 230-pound special teams player for 4 years. Like, it's bad. Under. Duck, agree or disagree?
Yeah, I mean, it was so disgusting. I'm still attending semi-monthly therapy sessions for what I had to watch last year with Pete Lembo's Buffalo team.
You're
Really
just
one of
doing
the more stunning
exposure
performances
therapy.
I've ever watched.
Yeah, exposure therapy. They just show that video of Victor Snow running out of bounds for no reason and be like, how does this make you feel? Show me on the doll where he hurt you.
I mean, and you could argue that the season really turned after they blew that 17-0 lead in the second half of the fourth quarter against Troy, and they just could never recover. The quarterback could never figure it out. They had so many opportunities to win games and get back into the MAC race, and they could just never do it. And they had talented players. They had 2 weapons in Victor Snow and McMillan at receiver. L.J. Henderson was a great running back. They had potency, and they just could never unlock it. And now all that potency goes away. I don't love what they have. I mean, you could make an argument that Gathings is a fairly decent receiver here, but I'm not enamored with the offensive line. I don't love the quarterback situation. They do have a guy, Savion Brown, who's a pretty versatile nickel player, and I think he is really a guy that, if they have a guy on defense, he's one of the guys that could do some things. Cornell Evans is a decent player that is along the defensive line, but special teams is going to be bad. New kicker, new punter, new return specialist. There's so much unproven here. There is 0 chance whatsoever. I can hardly watch this team in 2026, let alone bet on them to go over the win total. I'm out on these guys.
All right, moving on. Yeah, under for me. Akron.
Let's go.
And spinning. Oh, it's an equal. Is it going to hold on? Equal opportunity wheel. Yeah. I know Breeze is excited to talk Akron. We don't go too long. We can rebut him. You got any quick thoughts on Akron?
I think it's a solid team, a team that continues to be tough in the defensive trench. I like Omari Abor, who could be a fun player at defensive end after coming in from SMU. Ronald Hull and Cyrus Durham are good players along the D-line. I think the secondary could be in fairly decent shape. You get Ami Branch, who's playing at the nickel position, and Alex Branch could be in the mix at corner. Mekhi Flowers is a decent player from coming over from Penn State and is now here. Could end up being a feisty defensive group at Akron. One of the things I really liked about this team is that they had nothing to play for last year after experiencing the APR academic ban. And yet at 2-6, they have nothing to play for, no bowl game. They win 3 of the last 4. They played very feisty, hard football, really played up for Joe Moorhead. Poffenberger is going to be a really good player at this level. I think the offense will have some punch. I like Jordan Gant as a guy you can really hang your hat on. We'll let Mike cover the rest, but I like Akron this year.
Yeah, win total 4.5, around 18-1 at the book. I'm looking at to win the league. I'm right at 4.5, but Poffenberger, he could unlock some potential here. The problem with Akron, like Buffalo, they just don't have any money. I mean, they probably have the lowest NIL in all of college football. So given that, Moorhead's doing a good job here. They do drop to 115th in returning production, but that's basically like the rest of the league. If this quarterback hits, Akron definitely has some potential, and you are a believer, Mike.
I'm a believer. Over 4.5. Reese Poffenbarger season starts now. Shihan Jayaraja from CBS and I, we are at the front of this bandwagon. There's ample room. First class tickets still available. Poffenbarger set the world on fire at Albany. 6,600 passing yards, 60 TDs in 2 years. Bet on himself, and listen, he goes to Miami, sits behind Cam Ward, number 1 pick in the NFL draft, goes to North Texas, loses so narrowly a quarterback battle in August, goes to Drew Mestamaker, and that's changed that kid's life. When you look at him on film, great deep ball, really, really good at manipulating the pocket, climbing the pocket, making throws into tight windows deep downfield. Now he gets to run the show in the Rubber City. He's got weapons. I can't believe they got Jordan Gant back. 1,000-yard rusher chooses to return to a G6 program. Like, in what world? Marcel Williams also was a menace in November last year, 30 receptions, 458 yards, 2 TDs in their last 4 games. Both of those guys are going to be first team all MAC, or at least have an opportunity.
Mason and Williams both as freshmen flashed at receiver.
Yeah, Mason, who, talk about like a weird body type. We talked about Keldrick Luster earlier. He's 5'9", 145 pounds, but he's got blazing speed at 4.43 in the 40-yard dash. They can use him in like gadget plays and stuff like that. Can the line be average? Because if the line is average by MAC standards, they have 34% returning experience, 3 FCS starters kind of mixed in there to patch things up. If it's average, this offense will be top 6 in the league. The defense flew all the way up to 87th in SP Plus last year. They returned just 3 starters, but I really, they need a couple of these guys to hit. Jordan Jones comes from the JUCO ranks at linebacker. Cyrus Durham, was somebody who at times popped. He had come over from Arizona. They need more from him. They need him to be closer to a double-digit sack guy. But Tim Tybesar, he did really great work. And the fact that he's back as defensive coordinator, I like it. The schedule, they're going to be favored 3 times. And then I just have this feeling, I'm going to sprinkle a couple money lines. UNLV has a long road trip, and we saw what happened last year. Yeah, they should have lost to Miami of Ohio last year. They get Wake, they get Minnesota. I'm not necessarily super excited about those teams. I'm not going to say they're going to win more than one, but maybe they steal one of those games. And last piece, late bye week in week 9 gives them a boost for the stretch run. I think they get over it. I think they flirt with bowl eligibility and cash this ticket.
All right, next up. UMass, baby. And then who's going to start? UMass. Of course, it's me. All right, UMass. Tell me I'm crazy. UMass, which let's put numbers. So over 2.5, juice to the over. You can get them like 80, 100 to 1 to win the league. They went winless last year. They weren't even close, although they should have beat Buffalo. They have a 16-game losing streak. The last time they beat an FBS team at home, was in 2021. They haven't won more than 4 games since 2011. They lost their 2 best players. One was a punter. Tells you all you need to know. And then their wide receiver Gibson to Virginia. But this is the easiest schedule in the country for my numbers. They have like 4 or 5 winnable games on this schedule, and they'll be favored, I think, in like decent favorites in 2 of them. Can they get to 3? Here's my case. They bring in Pop Watson at quarterback from Vatech, the best quarterback they've had in a long time there. By the way, it is funny that UMass hasn't won a home game since 2021, but they beat Bryson Daly and Diego Pavio on the road in 2023.
Yeah, we don't need to bring that up. Somehow that happened to me. The one time that we got a head-to-head against you with Diego Pavia and I didn't win it. Christ.
That was amazing. But the other thing is, so I think their quarterback play is going to be improved. Can they get better offensive line play is the biggest question, because Watson, for his electric, that game against Virginia, he was electric. He does take too many sacks, and his sack rate is way too high. But he's reunited with a wide receiver they brought in from BC and Griffin. They played together in high school. They were both all state in this area back in, 2019, 2020. Watson, by the way, his quote, "We're going to kill the entire league. All the DBs in the MAC are like 5'10". But the other thing is, I think their defense should be a lot better. They were running out scout team players in the secondary because of all the injuries last year. They also get Nobles back from injury. That's big. But they basically will get 3 start. They were without like 4 or 5 starters last year that they'll get back from injury. But guys like McGee, Snyder, Nobles, and then they bring back a decent core. Their linebackers are very good. So I think their defense will be much more respectable. I project them at 3.64 wins. So over 2.5, heavily juiced, around like, what's it implied? Like, depending on where you're at, like 3.1. Like, I show like a half win value. I'm making the dot. And the best part about betting this over is you'll really care about the Sacred Heart and Stonehill UMass games, which is amazing. I don't know where they'll be on TV or where I'll have to stream them. I'm in on UMass, baby. Over 2.5. Duck, agree or disagree?
I do agree, and I agree those games against Sacred Heart and Stonehill will be important. They'll be watched. They may be discussed on the BBOC live show on Saturday mornings during those weeks. You'll have to tune in for that.
I didn't even mention Sacramento State, by the way. They could win that game, too.
They absolutely can win that game. I'll be honest, I'm not enamored with the roster. The defense does have a little ways to go to be really formidable in the MAC, but I feel like when we saw UMass last year, they were so unsettled at the quarterback position, and they just struggled to figure out what they wanted to be. They played Hairston, they played Jordan Grant, who came over from Yale, they played Rose, and if you look at some of their situational play calling in games, think about this. They threw the ball 42 times against Temple in the opener, 22 times against Iowa, 14 times against Buffalo, 51 times against Central Michigan. I just don't think this team recognized what they wanted to be with their offensive identity. And when they figured it out a little bit late in the season, there was a few flashes of brilliance in the games against Ohio, Bowling Green, but it just was too little too late. The team was already dejected. I think if we get a little bit tougher play on the O-line, if they can settle on Pop and he can really create this offensive identity. I like T.Y. Harding. I like Max Dowling, the tight end. I think they have some pieces. And I just really do think that we'll see more competitive football. It's not a bowl team. It's not an 8-4 type of team, but I think we're going to avoid the 35-point blowouts. They'll snag a couple wins early, get the team, stay healthy, get the team believing. I can see it. So I would play over 2.5.
Mike, 1 or 2 sentences on UMass?
There's only one way to play these guys. You have to play the over because they have 4 winnable games. You guys are absolutely correct. You know, in terms of Justin William Thomas, he gets a reboot. He's a former 4-star back. Max Dowling, a tight end, could be really good. But I'm going to give some free advice to anyone who intercepts Pop Watson this year. Have an equipment guy who has a tape measure in his pocket, run out on the field, and then immediately measure how tall you are after that pick. Free advice. You guys will go viral.
All right. UMass over, baby. Moving on. Of course, I'm going Ohio under again and then UMass over. I don't bet like any overs, and I'm betting UMass over. Kent State. And it is... You guys can't see that wheel? I wish you could. I'll have to figure that out. It is Breeze. Kent State, win total 3.5. You could find a lot of prices out there, 30-1, 60-1. Again, shop around. They do, like I said before, they're the only team in the league with the same head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, and quarterback. They are still very young, but, I mean, they could start, 6 to 8 sophomores on D, 3 on offense. But a lot of those guys got experience last year. I mean, they were starting a ton of freshmen on that defense. So how much of a leap can they take? You get the Shields back, a quarterback who showed a lot of promise. This Kent State team, it was an amazing job last year by Carney winning 5 games. Tougher schedule this year. Calabrese. I will say one quick note. Josh Cribbs, new special teams coach, legendary return man. And he does have great returners to work with in Harrison Clark, although kicker and punter, definitely a question this year. Calabrese, are you in or out on Kent State this year?
I'm in, baby, to the moon, over 3.5. I mean, Kent, they got a known commodity at quarterback. Drew DeShields, creative playmaker, works the pocket, always buys time until the very last second. No one in the G6 world, and maybe really in all college football, does a better job of running full speed at the line of scrimmage and getting rid of it right before he goes over. Tricked a few defenders on that move last year, and he only threw 3 interceptions. So he's a bit of a gunslinger, but he still makes the right decisions with the football. They nearly upset Buffalo. They left a win on the table against Ball State. Very impressive as far as I'm concerned. They got 2 full-time starters back on the left side of the line, juniors and seniors with some reps that can slide in at center, right guard, right tackle. For a program like Kent, you're never going to have 3+ starters on the offensive line, so it's kind of as good as it's going to get. DeRealis Clark, super fun all-purpose weapon. Mason King coming in at running back from Illinois State after punching in 14 TDs last year. I like that to give them a deeper running back room. The offense has the makings of a true middle-class MAC unit, which is saying a ton for Mark Carney and what he walked into last year. The defense worries me a ton. particularly in the box, 6 new starters. I think they'd be wise to flip into their 4-2-5 look a little more often, just, to kind of mitigate those issues and kind of the size, go for speed over size. Samaj Bridgman was a big get at linebacker. They need star power anywhere up front that they can get it. 3.5, I think this number, if I was hanging it, it'd be at 4. So I'm going to take advantage of that hook going in my direction and back these guys. Kent State football, exciting? Question mark. I think finally we can say yes. Even if they don't get to this win total, I think it's going to be an interesting product.
Duck, you have a betting deliverable on Kent State?
Yeah, and a lot of my notes are what Mike said. I like Drew DeShields. I like his pocket prowess. I like how he has this sort of cognitive ability to recognize the line of scrimmage, and he approaches the line of scrimmage while seeking to still throw downfield. I think those attributes are really hard to teach, and he clearly has it. He's a real dude at this level that will elevate their play. I like the skill guys coming in via the portal. Derelis Clark is good. Wayne Harris is good. But my betting deliverable is in week 1 when they go to South Carolina. I hit the over. I submitted it through in the app. There's still room to go on this. We're going to see Kent State put up some points, and they're really going to fight. They competed well. Despite the blowouts last year where they were so far behind, they competed well. And still ran their stuff. But South Carolina is breaking in a new offensive coordinator. They're going to be much more up-tempo. Lenora Sellers didn't take as many deep shots last year with South Carolina. And Kendall Briles comes in from TCU. They had 58 deep shots last year. I think we'll see South Carolina really stretch the field. They'll have success with that. They'll run much more tempo. Should get about 8 or 9 more plays on each side. I think we'll get some extra possessions. I think this one's a touchdown too low, so I did play over 52.5.
All right, 2 teams left. We got Bowling Green and yours truly. All right, Bowling Green. We have, I guess it's fitting. Sac State, the new member, is the last one that we'll get to. Bowling Green, win total 4.5, juice to the over, sitting implied around 5. I don't know, around 13, 15 to 1 to win the conference. I will look, Bowling Green, I love the hire of Eddie George. And just look at the recruiting. They have the best recruiting class in the MAC by far. So they're bringing in a lot of young talent. I think he's going to eventually get it right. Is it this year? I don't think so. You look at this offense. Now, the defense has promise. You bring back Eric George, who might kick inside, but at every single level of this defense, there's talent. Right? They bring in Ellis, who was a freshman All-American at Tennessee State before transferring to Purdue. All right, they lose Lamprin, ESPN Lamprin, to Colorado, but Dorian Pringle comes back from injury. You add Ellis, so the linebacker room has promise. The defensive line still has some talent, right? You have Bradley and George back. You bring in some talent in the secondary that I like. Hale at nickel from New Mexico State. Braxton is actually a corner I like at NC Central. And then you still have El Pascal at safety. JoJo Johnson basically took over a starting role in the second half of last year. So this defense, despite only having one returning starter on defense, I think could be feisty. It's the offense that's a disaster. Yes, Dendy's back at running back, and he had 3 straight 100 games as a freshman to end the year. So, that's what Bowling Green wants to do. But this is a team that wants to run the ball, and they want to use play action to throw it. What is this offensive line? The offensive line last year had 5 senior starters. They lose all 5 who had close to 10,000 career FBS snaps. How many FBS snaps does this room have this year? 700 total combined in the 2 deep. How about their wide receiver room? You take the projected starters, they have 11 career catches at the FBS level. Brennan Ridley had 50 at Hampton a couple years ago. Their tight ends, who they want to use a lot of 2 tight end sets, they've had really good tight ends the past couple of years. Their tight ends have 4 career catches. Maybe they hit at quarterback with Novosad from Oregon. There's also a D2 guy in Constantine. I can't say that I know much about him from Assumption. But the talent that this offense is going to be bad. And I just don't think that they're going to be able to score enough to be a threat in the MAC. Defense could be feisty. So what does that mean? I think BG underlooks all year are going to be worth pondering, especially before the market maybe catches up, because I do think this defense might be underrated, and I don't see how this goes well for this offense. BG, I project them at 4.82, so like I'm close to market. Nothing actionable for me, but we'll be looking for some unders. I think their defense is feisty. Offense is just poor, and like I don't want to go under on them because they do have a pretty high floor. So I could see this team getting back to a bowl. However, why tie up your money for the entire year when I think the win total basically is going to come down to the opener in a coin flip against Tarleton? Win that game, and I think they're going to get the 5 wins at least. Lose that game, you're 0-1. You lose to an FCS team at home. At Nebraska, at Iowa State, USF at home. Your first conference game is at Miami of Ohio. Probably 0-5. And what happens with the team from there? And Duck, I think you like them against Tarleton in week 1.
I mean, it's interesting. Tarleton State plays a game in 20 days, and they still don't have a published 2026 FCS roster for football on their website. And so I will tell you, Tarleton State lost a ton of talent from last year's team that did really well in the FCS playoffs. Quarterback's gone. A lot of the receivers are gone. Offensive line talent is down. The OC moves on and goes to the Sun Belt. So it's going to be a lot different looking Tarleton team. Defense still could be a little feisty, but I like the under in that week 1 matchup between Tarleton State and Bowling Green. And I think Bowling Green, it was incorrect for them to be lined underdogs. I'll be honest with you on Bowling Green. I don't hate the direction this team is trying to go. And I do think Novosad could be a player that gives them a little bit more punch. I like the running back Dendy coming back, led the team in rushing last year. And Kamarian Baldwin is a shifty back coming in from Charleston Southern, who could be a nice spell back, third down back. I do like the versatility of the tight ends. They're not huge, big body tight ends, but they can move in their pass receiving, and they could create a little mismatch there. And I love that they're bringing Leo Kemp to run the fullback position. This is the only team in the country that's going to consistently run these guys in Central Michigan, 22 personnel. We're going to see 2 tight ends. We're going to see a fullback. None of it matters without the development of the offensive line, and that's a huge concern because they just don't have a lot of snaps. They've only got 3 returning FBS starts along the O-line. So that'll really be what it needs to be, but they're going to run the ball a ton. It's going to be slow pace. I actually do think the defense could be really feisty. A guy you didn't mention was Cade Costas coming over. I think he could be really good to complement Eric George. Sayla Brown comes in from Louisville. This could be a nasty MAC D line when it's all said and done. Pringle back at middle linebacker.
Was a complete scheme shift last year with how they run with their defensive line and how they attack gaps. So like second year of the system, right? Guys understanding what this defense wants to do, bringing in more guys that better fit the scheme. And I think that there's talent at all 3 levels. So yeah, I agree. This defense could be very nasty.
Lower scoring games, slow pace. I think we look to unders with this team in their games. Another betting deliverable, though, for Bowling Green is after they take their lumps, they go to Nebraska, they go to Iowa State, they've got South Florida coming in on homecoming. I do think we'll see a perception shift on Bowling Green, and they could have some ATS value, specifically hosting Sac State, Ball State, and at Buffalo. So those are 3 games I want to maybe isolate backing the Falcons.
Mike, any quick thoughts?
Yeah, I can't really form a true opinion with Austin Novosad having all of 15 career pass attempts because being buried on the depth chart and some injuries, the offensive line retooling. And I agree the defense could be really good. My concern is Joe Bowden is calling plays for the very first time as a DC. So I want to see it a little bit. And what's interesting, yes, it's a murderer's row in terms of away games, against quality competition this year. But that Tarleton game, I think, is going to give us a lot of insight into kind of the overall ceiling. Like if they push that FCS team around, there's still a chance with brand new faces and everything working on the fly that they could, scratch and claw and get to the 5th or 6th best offensive line in this league. Because if they do that, this team is going to go to a bowl game and is going to play the kind of football they want. But if this is like the 10th best line in this league, they're sunk right out of the gate. So I want to see what it looks like against an FCS front right away.
Yeah, that's my biggest concern too, because the receivers are not elite. So they're going to need play action to work, and they're going to need time. And if the offensive line is not blocking, it's all going to fall apart. And then the defense is going to get worn down. And then they're, especially after like a very tough start. And I think that Tarleton game sets the tone for the season, and we'll learn a lot. Lastly, Sac State, the newest member. Let's give it a spin. Sacramento State, win total 4.5, juice to the over. Find them at various prices to win the MAC. I don't know, looking at 30-1 right now. This is all brand new. And we got Duck who's going to lead us off with Sac State. All brand new. I mean, new staff, new schemes, new level, new conference, new stadiums are going to travel to. I mean, the amount of travel that this team's going to have to do this year is crazy. This is a brand new roster that we already talked about. It wasn't really built for FBS. They're trying to fill some holes with JUCO guys. There's the potential for some wins here, but I don't see it. I think this is going to be a rough year. I mean, you look at this offense, which might be starting 8 transfers from, they're basically all from FCS and lower levels. And they're replacing an offense that lost 4 starters to Power 4 and then 3 multi-year starters on the offensive line to graduation. The defense doesn't look great for this new 3-3 stack. I'm a seller. Duck, walk us through Sac State. Are you a seller?
Very much a seller. You look at the move, and first thing we see is the third coaching regime come in 3 years after Brendan Marion spent 1 year here running the go-go, and now we've got Alonzo Carter who comes in. They went through a recruiting wave as Sacramento State was anticipating competing as an FCS independent, and so he recruited a roster to potentially do that. The move to FBS happened very suddenly after that recruiting wave took shape. Now they found the MAC being willing to take the money to let them be in, but it's certainly not a natural fit. It's going to create some unique travel challenges for them and for other opponents. You're getting Carson Conklin who comes in. He played at Fresno and came back now to Sacramento State. You look at a guy like Jamar Curtis, who's a decent FCS level running back, but I really wonder how he's going to do against FBS competition. He's a small back. He's shifty and versatile, but I worry about the durability here. The receiver group is, whatever, just kind of not, there's no wow factor in my opinion. The O-line is a massive concern for me. You have zero continuity with the group. They're on their 3rd offensive install and unique installs. It's not like it's just variations of the same thing. They're 3 completely different schemes, and you haven't been in this type of blocking system now for any amount of time. Truly, it's an FCS level offensive line and a middling FCS level offensive line. This is not like a team that was running through the big sky like Montana State and Montana and a perennial top 5 FCS team. They would occasionally make the FCS playoffs. Generally, they'd get bounced in the first round. And I just don't see this going overly well. I do think the defense has a few pieces that...
The linebacker room is good.
Linebacker room is not too terribly bad. Xavier Williams is okay. Jamel Howard and Miles Bailey. It's a decent FCS level D-line. If they mature, maybe they can build something for next year, but the havoc numbers, 38 sacks, will not happen this year. 3.9 yards per carry surrendered on the ground will not happen this year. I don't think the corners, although they are big, I don't think these guys can cover at this level. I think they get torched regularly. Some of the numbers defensively last year looked good because they played South Dakota State, who didn't have a quarterback, Central Arkansas, who couldn't throw the ball, Portland State, who was horrific. I think these guys get torched regularly. Wins against UMass and Kent State are not assured. This was my favorite win total of the entire season at any level. I hit 5.5 immediately as soon as it came out. I had to pick my eyeballs up off the floor when I was looking at this on the computer. I could not believe that this was not 3.5. I still think we have room to go. I'm good at 4.5. I think there's one shop out there that has a flat 5. You could look that route, a little juicy, but I've got these guys favored twice all season. They will beat Mississippi Valley State, and they'll beat them handily at home. They'll win by 4 or 5 touchdowns or more. But that's the only assured win all season, and maybe the only win they get. Every other team on their schedule is so much better, and just the maturation of the roster at an FBS level, even UMass could make these guys look like chumps. So I project 4.1 because when you look at how the projections work, if you're 10-point underdogs in every game. There's still some theoretical chance you could win those games, but I don't think it's going to go very well this season for Sacramento State. And so even at 4.5, I like under.
Yeah, I project 4.1. You can get plus money at 4.5 too. And look, 4 cross-country trips for like an FCS roster that doesn't have much depth. And then, oh, by the way, you're at Sac State in the MAC. You're going to be traveling across the country all year. How about at the end of the year, you're going to have to go out to Hawaii, which is pretty funny. Calabrese, any final closing quick thoughts on Sac State before we wrap it up?
Yeah, there's going to be some really weird against the spread margins in this one because you got 2,000+ mile road trips going for and against them. UMass comes to them, Ohio, Kent, Toledo, Mississippi Valley State. I think max they win 3. They probably win 1 or 2. Duck got the best of that number, but if he can still get under 5, that's incredible. Eric Kiesau, the OC, his work at Boise and Auburn tells me that he wants to establish the run. He did it with Tank Bigsby, calling plays at Auburn. I like their running back room, but I don't love this offensive line. Matthew Coleman at wide receiver could be all right. But yeah, it's potential disaster with only 7% experience on the offensive line. The front 7 could be okay. And the last piece, 3-star transfers in the secondary, and Amari Wallace from Miami, Florida. He was a bona fide star in high school. Can he be that in the MAC? Yeah, maybe. They could have a few bright spots, but for them to win more than 3 games, something has to go horribly wrong for their opponents. I just don't see how everything can go right for them. And with the weird travel quirks, I'm just putting it out there. Don't get spooked if they absolutely get boat raced and then they win a game kind of out of nowhere because somebody's gassed flying across the country. We haven't really experienced it quite to this level at the G6 level, but you've seen it in spots in the ACC with like Cam Ward and the Miami Hurricanes traveling to Cal Berkeley and almost losing that game. Like weird things happen. These guys aren't professional athletes. Sometimes the coaching staff doesn't have all the right levers to pull to get teams ready. Just something to consider with Sac State.
That's all 13 teams in the MAC covered. Before we get out of here, quickly recap favorite win totals, your pick, your conference championship matchup and winner. For me, win totals looks Western Michigan under, UMass over, Buffalo under, Sac State under, Ohio under. Eastern Michigan is my flyer. My championship matchup, I'm going to say Eastern Michigan versus Toledo. A lot of variance with Toledo. Their secondary is the biggest question for me. And then how the FCS guys translate, which is why they have so much variance. But who's really throwing it on them? Like, if you look at their schedule, it's like, who's really going to come out and just throw it all over the yard? Besides my guy, Noah Kim, and Stuckey if needed. EMU, flyer. Duck?
Western Michigan under 7.5. I like Ohio under. I like Sac State under. And I've got Miami of Ohio winning the MAC, defeating EMU, who gets to the title game.
Western Michigan under 7.5, Akron over 4.5, Kent over 3.5, Central Michigan over Toledo in the MAC championship.
We have Akron overs, Kent overs, and UMass overs. What could go wrong? Thanks to Mike and Duck for joining me. Thanks to our producer, David, on the back end. Hour 45, not bad for the MAC for 13 teams. I think that was our record time. We'll cut it down some for 10 teams in the wonderful Mountain West. I think we did a good job. It was fun with the wheel. But that'll do it for us. 3 previews already out. Make sure you check them out. Interview series that Duck and Breeze did. We will continue the conference previews all throughout the summer leading up to week 0. We will have a recap episode, recapping all of our favorite bets for every conference. We'll have an award show. And Colin and I will be doing the Power 4 conferences here in about a week and a half. Thank you so much for listening. Love you guys. Make sure you subscribe, tell a friend, tell an enemy. Leave a 5-star review. We're going to give out some free futures, some free BBOC hats. Keep it rolling, baby. Thanks for listening. Catch you later. Cheers.